John from Ripewave Audio for this part 2 of our JBL MA9100HP in-house review. And this is their latest AV receiver range, the Modern Audio MA series. And this was just announced last month. And we have this unit in-house. This is the flagship of that line, several models. And the HP models particularly have some additional features like Direct Live. We did the unboxing and initial setup in the last video, so go back and take a look at that one if you haven't seen it. And we're to pick up where we left off on that one so we can cover down on some important topics, particularly the easy setup EQ calibration. Now, this is the included room calibration software with these units. Now, as I said, the HP units also have Direct Live. We're not going to get into those in this review because we've done a lot of Direct Live. We know what it can do, the experience there. Go back and look at some of those videos we did with some other models. We don't expect the experience to be much different. It's still using an external PC. You have to purchase a microphone. The standard process does apply. So we don't expect anything new, and we know you can tailor your sound from there and get it really good, right? But we're going to be interested in how this thing sounds without all that calibration applied. This will let us know how good a baseline this unit is. Before we get into the sound quality evaluation, we're going to talk about the user experience, how you can navigate this, looking at the front display, you're looking at on-screen display, using some of the other tools. There is a premium audio mobile app and a web interface. We'll look at both of those. And then we'll talk about the sound quality and how this compares to other things we have in-house. We have our Marantz Cinema 50 back. That's a $2,500 unit. This is a $1,600 unit. We also have our RMC1 reference processor. Now, you always say that's not a fair comparison, but we want to see, even if you take that extra step, how much better you really get. So this will be an interesting comparison. And if you remember from that first video, we were pretty disappointed that this modern audio series is not delivering an easy consumer experience that they advertise. They pitch this for people who are new to home theater to get in. This is simplicity. I even heard some videos from Cedia where the JBL spokesperson was talking about its ease of use. We have yet to see that. So after we talk about the sound quality, we're going to give our final impressions, our final conclusion. Would we recommend this? Now, we're hoping that the sound quality and these other user experience elements will bring this up to a place we can recommend it. But as it currently stands, I'm not ready to make that recommendation. So we'll get into this first. Now, if you remember from the last video, we set up the wireless configuration. One thing I wanted to point out is on the wireless configuration, if you're going to use this with an iOS device and you're going to use AirPlay for later on with the streaming, there's some important step that you have to do where you're not going to get AirPlay to work. And there's no documentation that really explains it. Again, a complaint that we have about documentation from JBL. We never saw it with the synthesis products or their Arcam line, or we're not seeing it here, to the quality we would expect from a premium company that's owned by the likes of Samsung. And when we first set up the networking, and they have this process, which is pretty slick, you discover this with your mobile device and it makes that connection. But if you forget to put in a password, it's not going to work. I'll explain as we go along, but what I'm first going to do is disconnect the configuration we have. All right, so I'm going to hit the Setup menu button, and we're going to go into Setup, and we're going to Network Status. Now it says Status because it's not really a network setup. What you can only do from this screen is view the connection, it's currently wireless, and how it's configured, and reset it. You cannot configure the wireless from here. This is very much unlike any other receiver that I've seen, where you normally can select from a list of available networks, put your password in and all that. Now, while you can't do that manual setting, the automatic nature of this is pretty good, and this is where I give them some marks, but I would still like to see that manual configuration being available. But if this was truly coming out as something for somebody with limited knowledge of electronics, well, I could see foregoing the manual setting. So we'll go in here and we'll do a network reset. To reset this up, we are going to have to power down the JBL and restart it. And in that process, we'll be able to go into our iOS device and then set this up as an AirPlay speaker. So this process is now done on resetting the network. We will power down and we will power back up again. And as it's powering up, I'm going into settings. And then from settings here into Wi-Fi, and we got to give this some time. What we're going to be looking for is under setup new AirPlay speaker. And this is not going to appear until this is discovered by your iOS device. Once it's discovered, you're going to see that choice of set up new AirPlay speaker below your other networks. And it will be JBL MA, your model number, in my case, MA9100HP, dash what I believe is some unique identifier for the receiver. So I'm going to select that, and it'll let you choose the wireless network in case you have multiple wireless networks in your house to connect it to. It will let you rename your speaker. We can call this Ripewave, and we put a password in here. Now nothing is in there by default, and you can hit the next button and it will connect the speaker. But AirPlay won't seem to work for me unless I put a manual password in here. When AirPlay tries to connect to a speaker, the first time at least, it's going to ask you for a code that's appearing on your screen. You're not going to see anything on the screen. You may not even have the screen on. But even if you did, it wouldn't display a code. This is the code. This is the screen that you need to get it from. And we need to put in here a code, which I believe is numerical, and 4 digits seems to work. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not secure. If you have neighbors close by, and if you don't trust your things coming by you in your street, put something less guessable than 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I'm serious. Don't use what I'm putting in here. I'm just doing it for simplicity for a quick test. And then we're going to hit next, and it will try to join your wireless network. Now, if this is successful, it will prompt you with that, and it has completed successfully this time. I've done this several times when it wasn't successful, and I've had to go back and reinitiate the reset of the network on my JBL, power it down, power it back on, repeat this whole process, and this time it's successful, so I'm just going to say done. At this point, you don't need to set up your speaker anymore. We can launch that premium audio app, and we should see a device where we wouldn't see one before we've actually connected to the network. It's connected, it's displaying here. Now, I've had instances where multiple copies of the same device showed up. I can't really explain it. It was there sometimes. I've seen as many as 3 of the same device showing up. Probably a bug in the software. If you see that, pick one of them. All of them will work. I didn't have any trouble. So going forward, we're now ready to do our calibration. We got to leave the premium audio app. That was just to prove the connection, get it all up and running. We're going to do the Easy Set EQ application. And when you bring this up, you see a choice. Are you using the MA310 model or a network model? Now, the MA310 in this series is the only one that doesn't have an Ethernet Wi-Fi connection. So you got to go through other means to connect. I think it's Bluetooth. We're going to pick a network model. That's what this is. This is the highest end. Or do you want to support both? That's always, if you want to look for both models, I can do that and it will work. It says here, if you need to connect an MA310, please make sure Bluetooth is open on the AVR. So there's your answer. And it's going out. It's going to look for the devices. It found my MA9100HP Ripewave. Now what's going to launch here is a calibration I have already done. We mentioned in the other video, there's only one speaker preset. So you can't save multiple types of layouts, even though I could configure my room as either, with this unit, either a 5.2.4 configuration or a 7.2.2 connection. But I can't. I have to choose one or the other and wipe it all out and start over again, re-entering my speaker distances and all that. And the same thing with this Easy Set EQ. There's only one slot for filters. You can redo a measurement, and we'll do that here, but you can see all the speakers. Now, I can't scroll while this is enabled, so I have to disable it first if you've already done a calibration. If you haven't, you'll just see the speakers shown here without any graph for the measurement feedback that is done. And now I can scroll down and I can see all the speakers. Your front speakers get listed twice, once for small, once for large. The small is assuming it's going to take those lower frequencies and put them out to a subwoofer, and the large is going to try to reproduce all those low notes, and it's taking both sets of measurements there. Then you have your center speaker, your surround speaker, your top front, and your top rear. Currently have this configured for a 5.2.4 configuration. Of course, the .2 subwoofer is really, as far as the unit's concerned, it's really one. I'm just telling you I have two subwoofers, which also means they kind of average those out together and they're getting a common signal. So if I wanted to redo one of these calibrations, let's say the small front speaker, it's showing the current graph. Again, if you were doing this fresh, you won't see a graph at all. They show you a red line before optimization and a green line with the optimization applied. This is what they expect you to have a response. We can redo this calibration. Now they give you some clues in the documentation. One of our audience did say, read the documentation. Well, I don't think that helped. There's a separate document out there on the JBL site that particularly focuses in on just this Easy Set EQ calibration. And in fact, they give you the barcodes to download it, and it shows you the models that support this. And they only list these new modern audio products. So this guide is specific to the unit that I have, and it does say 9100HP in it. And it says, connecting your phone or tablet, you make sure you're paired. Now they're saying pair this with Bluetooth, but I'm not sure that's really necessary because we don't have a 310. But it's just, then they talk about wired and wireless connections. Okay, great. They talk about speaker positions. We went through all this. Of course, they only show 5.1 and 7.1 configuration. Nothing in here about whether you have height speakers, one or two rows of heights. Nothing in there. So we get into the calibration with the Easy Set EQ. Gives some guidance on the subwoofers. If you're using something that uses active subwoofers, etc. They talk about the small versus large. Okay, now we're caught up here. This is launching the application. It is selecting the right model. We did network. They're saying step 1 is to launch the application. Select your model, whether it's a network or Bluetooth connection. Step 2, select the group to configure. You do these in pairs. So the front and the center, front and surrounds are done as pair. Of course, the center one is always going to be a single channel, and it shows the existing curves. And they say, now enter the room settings. Well, that's only when you select your speaker to actually measure. So we're going to hit redo. Now they're giving some instructions right in the app. He said they enter the natural roll-off frequency. So I have to know the natural roll-off frequency of my speakers. I got to go look up all my polk, what they're rated for. Of course, manufacturers kind of a little optimistic when they say that this thing's good down to a certain frequency. Now, this thing isn't going to tell me on its own, where a lot of these calibration tools would normally tell you that. So again, disappointed that you have to again do something manually. And as part of this, move around the room with the phone, and the phone at different heights. It says, move around the room with the phone. But that's different than what the instructions actually say. The manual actually says around the entire listening area, which is different than the room. The listening area is like, where am I going to sit? So I'm going to assume that the more constrained where the listening area, that makes more sense. I'm not moving around the whole room. But then I go at the next set of instructions, and it says stand at least 1.5 meters, or 5 feet. If you don't know meters, that's about 5 feet, so they can have optimal measurements. So, okay, in addition to be where you don't choose a listening position that's less than 5 feet from the speakers. Okay, well, if you have a small room, may be hard, but I find these instructions really confusing as written. When I read this the first time, I thought I had to stand 1.5 feet from the speaker. Make sure you're not standing between the speaker and the phone. Now that's going to use the microphone in the mobile device. Yeah, you don't want to have that in between you and the speaker. That's really good advice. And you need to have it run for at least 30 seconds. You can have it run an additional 60 seconds, and then it's definitely going to shut off. The more I read these instructions, the more they make sense to me. And then they run. So, okay, I got it. I'm going to say I got it here. We're going to run this. When they talk about the listening area, don't keep it static like a lot of these measurements are made. Move it. I'm going to show this as I'm not in the listening position, but I want to give you a sense on this of how it works. So I'm going to say got it. But I have to put now the roll-off frequency. Maybe I'll just say it's 50 hertz. The speakers are rated to go down to 30 or something like that. I don't believe it. And then the room EQ target function, 0 dB or minus 6 dB for small rooms, plus 6 dB for large rooms. So they say if you're not getting enough bass, move that slider to the left. This probably means I have to redo this if I don't like the results. So I think we're going to run this. We'll listen to it. If it sounds like it has too much bass, we're going to move it to the right. If we have too little bass, we're going to move it to the left. You are currently calibrating the front small channel. So it tells you what you're going to be calibrating. We say okay. And then we begin. So I'm going to hit begin. And I'm showing you what I would do to give different heights, because people's heads are at different heights. Now, this is not going to give you good results, but pretend I'm in the listening area and I'm moving this around facing the speaker and making sure I stand at least 5 feet, 1.5 meters away. And once it's gone a whole minute, now I wouldn't be talking if this was the real measurement. But once it's gone through the whole way, it's going to calculate and produce a curve. And the first one is the red. That's the measurement. That's what it measured for response. And then I hit calibrate, and they say this is what's going to be the adjusted response. And when we hit done, you see the graph, and we can go to all these other pair of speakers and do their calibrations or redo their calibrations. At the top of the screen, it has an enable button. So we have to hit that enable to lock in that configuration and make sure that's stored in the unit. With the measurement done, we return, we'll see the list of the other speakers, and we have to go through each speaker pair or the center speaker where it's just the center and go through its calibration. You'll notice that there's no calibration for the subwoofers. Those are all manual. You have to go and adjust your knobs and get those where you want by yourself. And once you think this is all good, I mean, you could continue to redo calibrations until you felt it was good. There really isn't any target curve setting here, any presets. There's only one choice for calibration. It's what they think is best. And once it's all good, you hit that enable button, and that locks in the configuration. Notice you can't go in afterwards and make any changes once that's locked in. Of course, you can disable it again and go redo those calibrations, but by hitting enable, that makes it go to your JBL receiver. And in the JBL receiver, what you want to do is make sure it's running. So you go into audio, you go into room EQ, which is set to off, and we hit to the right button, and now it can be set to easy set EQ. Now if you do have Dirac set up, that Dirac choice will be here. So I said you only get one slot, but you would have the easy setup EQ slot and you have a direct slot. I wasn't able to find in the documentation anything that said how many slots you get with Dirac. Usually what you get with Dirac, but it's usually 3, but I wouldn't be surprised if in this case you only have 1. If you know, put that in the comments. I'd be interested. You know, I just don't want to have to pay for the license on this for something that I think is only going to give us marginal value back to this channel. So with that in place, let's go look at some of the user interface items. First, I'll talk about the remote. I don't care for this remote. It's not backlit. You have to really memorize it. It's hard to read the light gray buttons. You really have to study it, know where the buttons are. Okay, this is the volume here. This is your input select. This is your menu. This is your back button. This is the dim button. They replicate the buttons on the front of this. I find myself hitting the wrong button a lot of times. What I really don't like is when you go and hit this menu button. And this menu button, it's not persistent. It will time out, I think it's about 30 seconds, and go away. And it could be in the middle of something. I have to go back and get to that setting that I was on. To navigate the inputs, there's no direct buttons to an input. You have to cycle through them. Now here's the kicker too. If I'm sitting at the listening position and I'm cycling through the inputs, I can't read what's on the screen here. The labels are too small. So I would go through. I see a big round circle after I've set it, but when I'm cycling through it, it goes to this little icon and small words, and you have to really be up close. It looks good up close if I'm standing right in front of it, but sitting back more than a couple feet, I can't read it. So that is a major flaw, I think is a big miss. You got a big screen here. Make it so we can see this as we're cycling through. I can select inputs this way through the menu, and that will work. And I don't find the remote particularly responsive. I've got to really point it. I'm only a couple feet here with the remote, and if I'm not aiming it directly, it doesn't work really well. But I could go and select an input, and now we're on the input. Now here you can see the on-screen display will pop up HDMI 2, the surround mode, the volume. Let's go into something that actually has an active input. So we'll go in HDMI 1. And here we can see HDMI, but it goes away quickly, that on-screen display. If I just change the volume, it comes back. So that's one way to keep that up for a little bit longer. And that's your on-screen display. It's a little bar at the bottom. And it gives you the surround mode and the input and the volume, and that is it. It's not giving me any indication what the source material is. Is it a stereo source? Is it an Atmos source? Now I can choose my decoder, but that's not giving me what the native format is. So I don't see any of that either on the front display or the on-screen display. I can cycle through the modes, Dolby Surround, Neural X, stereo 2.0, 2.1, which brings in the subwoofers, all stereo, they're party mode. They don't say party here, but they say it in the manual. Native mode. I question the native mode because I was listening to an Atmos feed, set this to native, and I was only getting it on the front channels. So I question what native's really giving, and then it's back to surround. So not a lot on surround modes, not a lot to cover here. Let's see if the mobile app gives us any more of a pleasant experience on the navigation. So I'm going to bring up the premium audio app. It does for us. Now I see our unit. I can turn the power on and off, or I can just select it. And it gives us choices for radio, podcast, universal plug and play, and USB. It gives a little gear icon up here, but I don't get any playback navigation. I can't change the surround mode from this, I don't think, and I can't change the volume, and I can't change the input. I only have this network audio connection. Let's see what the gear gives me. Well, I can change the device name. I can do something with network setup. I can do an internet update, and I can see the software version, which in this case is 1.75. But that's it. I can't configure the speakers through here. I can't do the calibration. I already said that's another app. It's pretty limited. Now, when the first time I brought this up, before it did a firmware update, I actually saw Apple Music show up in here. And then after the upgrade, it went away. So for whatever reason, now you can still run Apple Music, but this is where setting in the AirPlay password was important. So let's go and bring up Apple Music. I want to select the right speaker for this to come out. And on the Apple Music app, there's a little button down here at the bottom that shows Apple TV. And it's showing the speakers. And I have several Apple TVs in here. But I'm trying to find here, yes, there is a speaker that we set up, that JBL Master Audio 9100HP Ripewave. I'm going to select that. Instead of passing it through the Apple TV, I want to go direct from the phone to the JBL. So you got to be careful here to what's it going through. I want to try this out where we're streaming directly. So now that I've done that, and what we notice is the artwork is showing up on the display. That was a question that one of you wrote in, is does that show up on the display? Well, it is. Darko says in his videos regarding streamers, and this is really no difference. Here we got streaming coming into a receiver, but it's doing the streaming function. Seeing the artwork on a small display like this, he thinks is one of the most useless features. And people are buying these things because they think it's cool to have the artwork in there. Well, it is cool, but you can't see it where you're sitting. So the difference, though, is I'm doing a network stream here, and there's nothing that displays on the TV while you're doing a network stream. It's a black screen. But if I'm doing my Apple TV and streaming it from there, and I got HDMI 1 where it's plugged into set up as a source, it's going to show big on the TV. But I don't see the artwork on the front. I would rather see it big on the TV and not here. Now, one might argue is if I'm streaming it from this device, then I see everything I want right on the device. That's fair. Okay, but I'm just letting you know what the experience will be. I still prefer going from the Apple TV. I know the quality that I'm going to be streaming over to it. It's a little more consistent from my perspective. If you open up a browser and you put the IP address in of this unit, and you get the IP address from those setup menus on the network and the status, and you put the IP address in, it does bring up a web page. And we try this with every receiver or processor we get because it's often undocumented, the web interface. And the same here, but what we found with this JBL unit was the web interface was the exact same feature set as we found on the mobile app. So don't expect to find anything different. It just gives you another option to get to those same features. So that is on user experience. I want to show you a couple of other features you can do through the settings. So let's go back to setup. Now there is something called system setup. They have a general setup. You can determine what the maximum volume is going to be, what the display on time is going to be. I have it set to always on. I don't think that was the default. You have a power mode. What's going to happen when you put this into standby? Is it going to be in low power? Is it going to pass through the HDMI and use a little bit more power? That uses the most. Green is going to use the least amount of energy in standby. And so low power is the default, and we'll leave it there. Is it going to automatically go on standby? I turn this off, but you could have this turn off in 8, 4 hours, 1 hour, 20 minutes. I think it was set to one of these lower settings by default, but I'm going to leave it as off. I'm just leave it on all the time. You can set your language. You have some HDMI settings. You're going to leave CEC on. Is audio going out to your TV? You can turn on mini on-screen display. Is set to on. Let's see if we put that to off, what we get for experience. So if I change the input, if we put that mini pop-up screen on, then we're we adjust the volume, and that's that little bar in there. So it doesn't make it smaller or larger, it just makes it go away when it turns off. We're going to leave it on. Kind of like it. Not everybody does. Then you have LED underglow. And that's that glow that it's putting on the bottom on here, and it shines on your table or wherever you're at. I don't know if you rack mount this, how much it would display. But we can set that to always on, always off. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. Is it just there during boot up? And the color can be orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, or red. We're going to leave ours as the JBL default orange. It can be bright, normal, dim, or off. I'm leaving it as bright. We'll let this, because this is so unique, I just like seeing it. You can assign the video input, and that's your system settings. Network status we already looked at. And your software setup, this will show you your firmware revision. A little more details that we saw in the mobile app, decoding on screen, etc. And then you can do a USB update, a factory reset, and so forth. And that's pretty much it. There is not a lot to configure. I will say on the source, you can change some defaults like your lip sync, whether the EQ is going to be on that particular source. So if you maybe want your CD player not to use the EQ, but your movies too, you can do that. What's going to be your default surround mode for that source, default bass and treble, and your default levels, it's defaulting to 0 and no adjustments for bass and treble on that. And you can do that for each of the inputs. One more point on the setup is Bluetooth, you have to decide whether it's going to be the receiver or the transmitter that is enabled. Now, most common use case is as a receiver, so you can stream from a mobile device to the receiver, your audio content. But sometimes you want to transmit to things like Bluetooth headphones. And so here's a pair of Sony Bluetooth headphones. The thing to note here is it can only be paired in one direction, not both directions at the same time. So you have to decide, are we going to be using Bluetooth to receive a source or to transmit out to speakers or headphones? So once I switch the Bluetooth from receive to transmit, I compare them to the headphones and it worked just fine. And then the speaker setup we looked at on the first video, where we set the types, the differences, distances, the levels, the crossover. We didn't look at the zone 2, but that's whether you want that party mode or not on. We'll just leave that off. So we went through the effort since the last video to wire up the entire system for the JBL MA9100HP to be wired to the amplifiers built into this. It has no pre-outs, so for us to test all the speakers, we had to run speaker wires directly to the unit. We have an AB switcher. We could easily switch between the RMC1, the Cinema 50, and the MA9100 to see what sounded better. And that's how our listening tests were conducted. Now, I will say, with our 4 ohm rated speakers, the JBL performed really well. The Class D amplifiers that are in here really are up for the task. These Polk audio speakers, they're not easy to drive speakers. And, we're giving, on a normal basis, these Emotiva XPA1 monoblocks, we can put out 1,000 watts to 4 ohms. Now, the JBL here will put 240 watts out at 4 ohms through those Class D amplifiers. Now, it's rated for 140 at 8 ohms. So I think you're going to have no trouble driving the most common speakers out there, including those that dip to 4 or maybe a little below 4 ohms with this unit. So no trouble with the built-in amplifiers. And that's it for the MA9100 setup and user experience. The question is, where does this sit on our curve with performance? I compared it against the Cinema 50. We did this in 2-channel listening mode with equal EQ turned off on both units. So this is just listening to the circuitry of the units. And our feeling was that the JBL sounded better than the Marantz Cinema 50. So here's one redeeming factor. A lot of things we don't like about the unit, but the sound quality is not bad. The easy setup EQ made it actually sound a little better. I will say that it does sound a little thin, and comparing it against something like the RMC1, much more rich, much more spacious. So I would position the JBL MA9100 EQ in Tier 2. The Cinema 50 was in Tier 3, and the RMC1 is in Tier 1. Now, each of these tiers have a lot of peers, and you can see this on the graph where you see similar products. And I wouldn't worry about the positioning within the circle. If it's in a Tier 2 circle, expect it to sound similarly as good with like models. Now, a word about the easy setup EQ. While we thought it sounded good, my experience with these simple calibration software is it might sound good in my room, like with Yamaha with the YPOW, but with the ability not to tailor it and adjust the curves and have control over it, if you have a room with less than ideal speaker placement and other factors that don't come out as nice as maybe the room I have, you may not get as good a results with the free version, making going to direct a more important investment. So that's my feeling is try it first with easy setup EQ. If you like it, you don't have to pay the money, but you knowing that if you order the Dirac, you'll likely be able to fine tune this to where you'd like it to go. And just keep in mind, you're not going to get it as good as a Tier 1 product, but as a Tier 2 product, I think the sound quality is pretty good. And that's my final conclusion here. I think this is a complete miss as it's not really designed for easy setup. They're not scoring points with me on that. They do a couple of things that work to that means, but not enough to really sell it to that first-time buyer. What are your thoughts? Your feedback would be real useful to this community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification so you're informed when the next video is posted. Keep in mind, we have the thanks button. You can give us a one-time donation. If you do that, really appreciate it. It helps these things come forward. We do have our affiliate links that will pop up during this video. If you order a product in that way or buy anything in that session, we get a small commission. Helps us, but doesn't cost you anything more. And I really hope to see you all again real soon. And until then, keep evolving your audio experience.